What if no one listens? What if my friends turn against me? What if, what if, what if? As a podcaster, I've had these thoughts, and I bet that you probably have had something similar. My guest today is Becca Ingersoll, and she's the host of Finding Joy Through Life's Trials, a podcast which she describes as a safe place for us to share our stories. She had those what if thoughts too, but you're going to hear what Becca did to push past these and to get her podcast off paper and into our ears. We're going to talk about being brave and sharing scary parts of life, about taking the leap when your head is full of all those what ifs, and about Becca's reading retreat. Becca is a former high school English teacher, a stay-at-home mum to twins who were born prematurely, and one of whom then underwent treatment for leukemia. She's also a keen crafter and reader. My name is Alison Fraser. I'm the host of Women Who Podcast, the show for side hustling women who are ambitious but time limited. Each week, I bring you real life stories and actionable tips to help you create and grow your own podcast. Let's get into it. Welcome on to Women Who Podcast, Becca Ingersoll, all the way from Utah, United States.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
I have known you, Becca, since, I'm going to say mid last year when we both started Kathy Heller's podcasting course. I joined it because I'd done it the year before and I wanted to make more connections. What was it that inspired you to go down this path of podcasting?
Okay. So I guess the very initial thought that I have a friend who started a podcast. She's actually not doing it currently anymore, but she was a fellow NICU mom. And I just thought she was so brave to do it. And I really liked her podcast, and it helped me and gave me some good ideas for self-care and things like that. But I never thought I would start my own. That was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And then I slowly started listening to more podcasts. So while my son is in remission now, but he was diagnosed with leukemia. And while we were at the hospital a lot and I had to kill a lot of time, I started listening to more podcasts and began loving them. Then 2 falls ago, so the first time you took Kathy's course, I did her boot camp. And I just got a random ad on Facebook about her boot camp is how I found out about her. And I took her boot camp and fell in love with her and was like, okay, I can do this. I have a story to tell. I can do this and help other women. But I couldn't quite pull the trigger that year. I was hesitant with the money and just still, I'd only launched my blog a few months before I took that boot camp. So I wanted to kind of focus on that for a bit longer because I tend to have shiny new object syndrome, I have ADHD. So I was like, no, I'll focus on blogging for another year and then I'll take it next year. And I did. So I signed up in the fall and we became Podmates, which has been super. And yeah, that's my story in a nutshell.
I love how you've taken that time, like there's been all the seed was planted all those years ago and it's slowly germinated and now you're blooming, I suppose we could say, we're finding joy through life's trials.
Yeah.
You said that your friend had a podcast and you thought that she was really brave.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that do you call yourself brave or do you, how have you come around that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I never in the past would have considered myself brave, but I do call myself brave now. So I probably always was, but I also dealt with a lot of anxiety for most of my life. And I struggled with fear of rejection, fear of criticism, all of those things. So I've always had big dreams, but it's only been within the past probably 2 years, honestly, but 3 years maybe that I've been able to get over those fears. They still exist, but still do the thing, even though I know it's hard, and just take bold actions. And a lot of that came about because I already mentioned this, but my son's cancer diagnosis was when he was nearing the end of his treatment. I just felt like, well, I was really depleted individually. I'd just been giving, giving, giving as a caregiver. And I felt like it was my time to shine, so to speak, my time to take time for myself and actually, and I felt like, okay, we've battled cancer and won. Like, can anything be more scary than that? Not really. Not really. So that gave me the push to, I hired a life coach and I was with her for 18 months and she helped me work on limiting beliefs. And that's when I launched my blog. And yeah, anyway, so I would call myself brave now, but it took a long time to get there.
I think a lot of people listening, though, will be able to identify with that, Becca, because when I may come across as quite confident when I'm podcasting, but I've also had all those, like the imposter syndrome, the fear of rejection, what are people thinking of me for having a podcast? Who am I to have a podcast?
Yes.
So what do you tell yourself when, what did what strategies did you have when you were about to pull the trigger on this thing?
Yeah.
When you were right in the middle of it all?
Yeah. One thing that my life coach taught me, her name's Robin Whitworth and she's amazing. But anyway, I tended to have a lot of, we call them thought bubbles, like stories that I would tell myself about what other people were thinking, whether I knew they were thinking that or not. And she encouraged me to think, how we think of what if scenarios. And when you have anxiety, a lot of the time, the what if scenarios you think of are negative ones. But she encouraged me to think of positive what ifs. What if your blog is a sensational success? What if you reach 100 moms who needed to hear your message? Things like that. So that is one thing, is considering just being open to dreaming about the positive what if and the impact and ripple effects that I could make. And then I would say the other thing is just, I always am encouraging to other women, other friends, other moms, and we're all our own worst critics. You know what I mean? And I tried to be nicer to myself and think about myself and talk to myself the way I would to a friend. Like I always tell a friend, no, your story matters. Every life is important. And I'm like, okay, well, why am I not saying that to myself? And then started believing it when I told myself enough times.
Those are really good reframes. I love the what if, this is a raging success, and what if the person who needs to hear this message hears it? Yeah, those are really good tactics. So I'm sure lots of other people can definitely benefit from that.
Yeah, I hope so.
You mentioned briefly before your son, he's in remission now and he's gone through a cancer journey.
Yes.
Your podcast is Finding Joy Through Life's Trials.
Yes.
And I know you shared so much of your personal story on your podcast. What reaction have you had from people hearing what you've gone through?
It's kind of funny. Like, you asked if I would consider myself brave, and I had gotten to that point of considering myself brave, but when I'm being interviewed, for example, on other podcasts too. So I guess that's technically not mine, but when other people like yourself are interviewing me and they hear my story, a lot of the time I get the reaction, just like shock of all of the different trials that we've been through and like awe of, oh my gosh, you're amazing to get through that. And that must have been so hard. And I've seen that in writing, like on social media and things like that from friends before. But to see people's honest facial reactions when they're interviewing me and hearing my story for the first time, it's been kind of inspiring in and of itself in boosting my confidence of, yeah, I have conquered a lot of tough things and gone through it. When I was going through it, it was just like survival mode. It was just what I did. But I guess technically, like seeing everyone else's reactions, I'm like, well, yeah, there are other paths that I could have taken, I suppose. I could have fallen into a deep depression, which sometimes it's out of your hands anyway. But I'm just saying it's given me more self-confidence seeing other people's reaction to my story.
How important has your faith been for all the things that you've overcome? Because I know I've listened to your podcast, so I've heard you talk about, your infertility, and then you've got your NICU kids, and then you've got cancer, cancer diagnosis. Those are all really hard things. One, just take one of those.
Yeah.
And you've lived all of those.
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. Yeah. Without my faith, it's different for everyone, but without my faith, I don't even like to think of how much harder each of those trials would have been, because from the beginning, my husband and I have relied on God, and we prayed a lot more, read and studied scriptures together a lot more. I just had a friend ask me for like an experience that revolved around how reading scriptures has helped me. And I always think of this one moment when my boys had been in the NICU for almost 5 months already. For your listeners who don't know this, they were born at 23 weeks, 6 days gestation. So they were in the NICU for over 5 months. And then it was almost time for them to go home. So a little over 5 months later, and we were like talking which day they could come home. And I went into the NICU one day and found out that one of my twins, Lincoln, he had hydrocephalus, which we knew, but we found out that he needed to have a surgery and have a shunt placed. And we thought we'd dodged that bullet. We thought that we knew that was a possibility since he was like a week old, but it had been long enough that we thought, oh, good, he won't have to have brain surgery. And then right as he was about to go home, that's when they decided, oh, no, he needs one. And so I looked at a Facebook post that I posted at that time. Thank goodness for social media, because I didn't take a journal, write in a journal at the time, but I just recently had this memory pop up. And that night, Josh and I were doing our nightly scripture reading together, and it was the perfect chapter that we needed to read. It was all about Christ taking children and blessing them, and just that reassurance that we knew we weren't alone, and we're Christians, so we believe that we will be healed because of Christ's atonement. And I don't know, that's a very long-winded answer, but I don't even like to think of where the dark place I could have gone with my trials if it weren't for my faith.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Becca.
Yeah.
You share quite a lot on your podcast, and I think it's quite good for other women who are maybe thinking about starting a podcast to know that you can share those stories that, while hard at the time, you've come through them and you're on the other side, and you can share as much as you like on your podcast, or not share anything at all, but you can control the narrative.
So true. Like, I actually had a fellow childhood cancer mom ask in a group recently. She said, she was talking about how we always ask people like how they're doing. And she was talking about how she's trying to balance how much to tell, because there's a whole mountain of things she's feeling that the average person may not actually want to hear, even though they're asking. And my answer to her was, I started a podcast because then it's my platform, and anyone who wants to hear all of the ins and outs of my story has a place where they can go and listen. And those people who aren't interested or don't want to delve into it deeper, they don't have to listen to it if they don't want to. But my audience will find me, and I get to say whatever I want, like you said.
When you decided that you were going to launch a podcast, how easy did the name of your podcast come to you, and the topic, what you were going to discuss?
It was both easy and hard, if that's possible. So my blog, it is called Mercy Rose, and then the subtitle is the same name as my podcast, Finding Joy Through Life's Trials. So that was always my thought, that it would be something related to my blog title to kind of stay on brand. I love the name Mercy Rose, but it didn't really tell what my podcast was about. Someone just reading that title of a blog wouldn't really know, I think. So I went with the subtitle, but it's still difficult. I guess I'm a rebel in that I'm multi-passionate, and so it's still hard for me to narrow down a niche. I probably will more eventually, the more I podcast, but I love reading, so I talk about books a lot, and I talk about trials, and I interview people with trials, but a lot of my things are like self-care related, which I don't know. I feel like I could niche down more and grow my audience more quickly if I were willing to do that, but I can't bring myself to do it yet.
Oh, one day maybe.
One day, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you're multi-passionate because I am too. As you may have guessed, by the fact that I have two podcasts, this
Yes.
one and my Scottish podcast, and all those other things that go on in your life, and you're like, oh, I could do a podcast on this.
Honestly, sometimes I feel like my plate is so full right now, and I'm like, and I've never, at least at the last several years, felt like I had difficulty saying no. But recently I was thinking maybe I need to say no to my own ideas. Full plate. Maybe I need to stop following through on the ideas I have for a while.
I hear you on that. What I've started doing is writing the idea down, but I'm putting it on something to look at, in the next quarter, or I'm going to look at this. So I'm going to revisit this idea again in October.
Yes, I like that. I'm listening to, what's it called? The Creative Act, I think. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and he talks about the importance of letting seeds of inspiration germinate and let them sit there for a while instead of acting on every single one, because not every single idea is for you or at the right time. So I'm going to take a leaf out of your book on that one.
But you mentioned earlier that you love to read, and you talk about the books on your podcast, and you've recently held a reading retreat. So can you tell us about how you got the idea for that and what a reading retreat actually is?
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to talk about that. So how growing up, and even still, when people are trying to find their passion, one of the questions people sometimes ask is, if you had all the money in the world and you didn't have to worry about money, what would you do for a job, or what would you do? And some people say something job related. And for me, it was always, I would want to read all day. And so I've always been a reader, always loved it. And then becoming a mom, I don't know if you've heard of Zibby Owens, but she has a podcast called Moms Don't Have Time to Read. I love it. But that's the feeling that I get here a lot of the time from my fellow mom friends of, I used to love to read, but I just don't have time now. And I feel that too. And that's one reason why I listen to audiobooks instead of physical reading these days a lot more, because I can do that while my boys are around. But anyway, I realized that a lot of moms don't take the time to read, even if they love it. And retreats are, I don't know if they've always been a thing and they've just been in my blind spot, but around here, retreats are a big thing and becoming more common for women to go on. And so I wanted to provide a space where like-minded women who love to read but don't necessarily have time to, or give themselves time to read, had a place to go and talk about books, get book recommendations, have time away from their family and job and kid responsibilities, and have some downtime to just enjoy reading for a little bit. And so that's what I did. It was a couple of weeks ago, my first one, and I will definitely have more. You talked about imposter syndrome earlier, and I definitely had that over and over again while I was planning the retreat, but I just rolled with the punches and it ended up being great.
That is so awesome to hear. I'm so glad that you actually, you bit the bullet and did it, because so many times we'll have ideas of what, the whole, what if no one shows up?
Yeah.
What if people think that I'm crazy? Or
yeah, exactly.
But you went with the positive. What if it's a raging success?
Yeah, exactly. My most recent podcast episode, so I release an episode every Tuesday, and the one from last Tuesday was me talking about the retreat and the six overarching lessons I learned from taking the leap and planning it and doing it before I felt like I was ready.
How much reading did you actually get done, though, on your retreats?
You're so funny. That's exactly what my husband said. As I was packing the day of to get ready, he was like, not gonna get any reading done. I was like, well, technically, the weekend before the reading retreat, my husband and I had a little staycation, and I got lots of reading done that weekend. And he was like, well, at least you did last week. And I was like, yeah, maybe that was my reading retreat. And this reading retreat is for everyone else. And that's kind of how it ended up being. A little bit of reading done, but everyone else got more reading done than me. So I feel like it was still successful. We did a lot of talking and bonding as well, which everyone needed.
Well, I think that's just as important as the
Yep,
solitude and reading.
I agree. Yeah.
I mean, when women know that there are other women just like them, thinking the same things, going through the same stuff, I think that can be quite comforting.
Yes, I totally agree. And there were several people that said, oh, I can't wait till there's the next one. I didn't know that I needed this. And that's exactly how I felt the first retreat I went on. It wasn't, I have never been on a quote unquote reading retreat besides my own. I used to think, well, that's just simple. What's the reading retreat? But then I actually saw people on Instagram and stuff that were doing that. And I was like, okay, it isn't too simple. I can do it.
What book did you take?
Oh, I took several books. The main one that I actually got some reading done on is called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And I highly recommend it for anyone who feels like they're creative, or I honestly think everyone is creative, just in different ways. So I think her subtitle is something like A Spiritual Journey to Creativity or something like that. And so it has a lot of good advice and tips and things, ways of thinking that I had never considered when it comes to creativity before.
Okay, that book has been on my I should read this book this year list for about 4 years. I still haven't got around to it. So
it was on my list for a long time, and I can't remember what. Oh yeah, there's an online group that started like a 12-week course where we talk about one chapter every week. And so when that popped up, I was on one of the podcasts that I listened to. I was like, oh, okay, this is the time. I'm going to read it.
Can you remember what books other people at your retreat brought with them?
Oh, I wonder if I have my book right here with me. Let me see. See, we made these cute little notebooks. We decorated notebooks that I had in their swag bag. And so we could write down recommendations and things like that. So I wouldn't remember, but I have notes. So one of them, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't turn my alarm off. Okay. One of them was the Anne of Green Gables series. I can't remember which one, but that classic that I always love. One of them was Magnetic Femininity. And it's so funny because I'd never heard of it before, but I saw it recommended. So this person at my retreat recommended it, and then 2 more people on social media the same week. So I was like, oh, maybe that's a sign I should read it. And Throne of Glass was another one. I know there were more, but those were the top 3 that I wrote down. Yeah.
Can you share, Becca, with us, with the listeners, what tip you have learned from podcasting that you would like to pass on to someone who may be thinking about podcasting, but they haven't pulled the trigger yet?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my number one thing that I would recommend to anyone considering it is what Kathy Heller told us. Just do it messy. Don't worry about it being perfect. It's never going to be perfect. And so just jump in and do the best you can. And right along with that, you can read also. And I do. I'm a researcher when I want to start something new. So I hop on Pinterest and read all sorts of blog articles and whatnot. You can get a lot of lists of checklists or do this, don't do this. And for me, I think I might have started it earlier if I both podcast and my blog, if I had just given myself the permission to just do whatever's best for me. Everyone's going to have a different opinion. And there are obviously people who are successful, and it's a good idea to follow their advice, but don't beat yourself up for not following things to a T, I guess. Like, for example, the Tuesday after I went on my retreat, so I say that I post every single Tuesday, and I went 10 weeks posting every single Tuesday. But then that Tuesday after the retreat, everyone in my family was sick. And I beat myself up for it for a while. And then I was like, nope, I'm just not going to release one today and it'll be fine. And then I started again this past Tuesday and I have another one coming out tomorrow. So just like give yourself grace. don't worry about it being perfect. Give yourself grace and do what's best for you.
That's very, very good. Sage advice. Yeah. None of us are perfect anyway, are we? Like
No, not at
in
all.
general life.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. I'd love to hear the podcast that you like to listen to.
Yeah. Like you, I'm sure you're so great at encouraging other podcasters, which I'm so grateful for. So I have a lot of podcasting friends that I try to support and listen to, like yours and our other podmates. There are a couple of other women who are in our Kathy Heller group who live in Utah, and I listen to theirs, Carolee Garrison and Kristen Wilson. So those are some of them. Kathy Heller, obviously. I could just go on and on with podcasts I listen to. I have a very long list, and I just pick from whatever seems good to me at the time. Like, I love Junkyard Mayhem is a couple, an interabled couple. So he's in a wheelchair, and she doesn't have any quote unquote disabilities. And so I love that with my advocacy work because Lincoln also has cerebral palsy. Yeah, I could give you a whole list, but there's a handful.
So there is a podcast for everyone, I believe.
I totally agree. Yeah, and I love that.
But I love that you mentioned the Podmates podcasts in your list of podcasts, and also the other podcasters from the Kathy Heller group who are kind of local to you. So how important has community been for you on your podcasting journey?
Oh, it has been so incredibly helpful. Like, I talked about second guessing and feeling imposter syndrome and having hiccups. And if it weren't for people like you and our weekly meetings and like the Facebook groups that we were a part of, I don't know for sure if I would have quit and not launched my podcast, but it would have been much more likely that I would have quit. It's just so helpful to have accountability partners, to have people cheer you on when you're doubting yourself. And just community in general is something that I always preach because so Lincoln, my son who had cancer, was diagnosed 2 months before the pandemic really hit. And so for most of his treatment, it was very isolating. And I was just so grateful for women I met online who were going through the same thing and could give us tips and encouragement. And so I think that's where my love of finding a community really, really started. But I think anything that you want help with or want like-minded people with, you can always find a community. Or if you can't, then create one because it's so helpful.
And I think voicing your goal and your dreams is also super important because if you don't tell someone what you want to achieve, then you can just silently quit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like my blog, I don't think I mentioned this before, but I had wanted to launch a blog for years and years before I actually did it. I even bought the domain name and got started once, but then didn't actually launch it until I got that life coach and I set an official goal and she was checking up on me. So if you have someone else who's going to ask you about it, you're a lot more likely to follow through.
Yeah, that's very important. Thank you so much for coming on, Becca, and talking about your podcast, the things you've overcome along the way, and your reading retreat. I hope it inspires other people to do the things that they have been thinking about doing, but have been too scared to.
I hope so too. Thank you so much for having me on. I've loved it.
If you've had any of those what if thoughts, I hope you're now going to switch to more positive consequences. I love Becca's energy, and I'm so grateful to be in her podcasting pod. But you don't need to sign up to courses to find your tribe. You can find the Women Who Podcast Facebook group to get feedback, support, and advice from your fellow podcasters. I'll put the link in the show notes so you can come and join us, and you may find your podcasting bestie. You'll also have heard Becca mention how she skipped a week of her podcast and she gave herself grace. Well, I may do that too. By the time you hear this, I will have traveled from New Zealand to the UK, where I'm going to be based for about 3 months. I'm on a bit of a sabbatical to spend some time with my newly retired mum, while my son's schooling isn't at that critical stage. He's with me too, and we're exploring castles, museums, stately homes, all the things. It's all very different to New Zealand, so we're endeavouring to make the most of it. I'm going to be at the podcast show in London on May 22nd and 23rd. So if you're going to be there, I would love to meet up. Please get in touch. My email address is alison@alisonfraser.co. I'll post that and all Becca's info in the show notes. That's all from me in this episode, and I will speak to you again soon.
You've been listening to Women Who Podcast, the podcast for women with something to say.